Two best friends set out for a quick weekend hike in Colorado's Rockies and vanished without a trace. For 5 years, there were no answers. But when their GPS tracker was finally recovered deep in the mountains, the data revealed something impossible. They'd kept moving for days after the world believed they were gone. Evan Myers and Cole Turner weren't thrill-seekers chasing danger. They were careful, experienced, and deeply rooted in the outdoors. They'd grown up together in a small Oregon town, the kind where everyone knew their names. Evan was the steady one, detail-oriented, a junior architect who carried a notebook everywhere he went. Cole was louder, impulsive, a weekend photographer who loved to document their adventures for his small hiking blog, Trail Theory. By the fall of 2022, both were 25, still best friends, though life had started to pull them in different directions. Evan had just been offered a promotion in Portland, while Cole had plans to move to Denver to pursue freelance work. The Colorado trip was supposed to be a final weekend escape before they drifted into separate lives, a way to say goodbye to the trail, as Cole had joked in a text the night before. Their plan was simple: drive into Rocky Mountain National Park, hike the Glacier Gorge Trail, spend one night near the overlook, and return by Sunday afternoon. They had every detail planned: a shared GPS tracker, satellite communicator, extra batteries, emergency flares. Evan's precision made sure of it. Their last confirmed sighting came from a park ranger at the trailhead around 10:42 a.m. Saturday. The ranger later recalled how friendly they'd been, joking about the cold and asking if snow was expected that night. It wasn't. Temperatures were mild. Everything was perfect. That night, Evan's phone sent one last message to his sister. "Signal is weak. Made camp near the ridge. All good." It was the last anyone heard from them. When their families called park services 2 days later, rangers expected a routine retrieval, hikers who'd lost their way or gone off trail. But when search teams reached the ridge where the message had been sent, there was nothing. Not a tent. Not a scrap of gear. Even more unsettling, their GPS tracker stopped transmitting just a few hundred yards from their last known location, as if both devices had died at once, or been turned off. 5 years later, when that same GPS device was found, investigators discovered it had never stopped recording. It had only stopped sending. Saturday, October 14th, 2022. The first snow had dusted the peaks that week, leaving the lower trails damp but clear. The air was crisp, sunlight spilling through the aspens as Evan and Cole began their ascent. The first mile of Glacier Gorge was easy, well-marked, almost gentle, but the trail grew steeper, rougher, and quieter the higher they climbed. Cole's camera captured everything. Later, investigators would find fragments of those images on his cloud backup, not enough to form a timeline, but enough to paint a picture. The first photos were what you'd expect: a sunrise spilling gold over the valley, Evan laughing in a thermal jacket, a worn compass resting on a rock. Then, around noon, the tone shifted. Cole took a shot of a dense section of forest, trees leaning in like teeth, and another of a narrow wooden bridge crossing a stream. The timestamps stopped abruptly after that. The last uploaded image, at 12:57 p.m., showed Evan looking over his shoulder, eyes squinting against the sun. It was ordinary, but there's something about the framing that unsettled investigators. Evan wasn't posing. He looked like he'd just heard something behind him. According to the GPS data retrieved years later, they made camp at Ridge Point Hollow, an unofficial site just off-trail about 6 miles in. A quiet, wind-sheltered dip surrounded by spruce. Their route data showed consistent, deliberate movement until 8:14 p.m., when both devices, phones and GPS, synced one final time. After that, total silence. But what happened that night didn't feel like a storm or an accident. The conditions were calm. No wildlife reports, no falls recorded. Rangers later said their preparedness ruled out panic or confusion. It was as if they'd gone to sleep and simply never woke up. And yet, something strange surfaced in the days that followed. Other hikers on the trail that weekend reported hearing faint voices near the ridge. One said it sounded like laughter echoing off the rocks. Another swore she saw a small campfire flicker at dusk, exactly where Evan's last ping had come from. When rescuers arrived 2 days later, there was no trace of a fire. No footprints. But there were drag marks. Faint, fresh, leading downhill, and ending in nothing but rock and snow. When Evan and Cole failed to check in by Sunday night, no one panicked at first. Both had a reputation for losing track of time when outdoors. But by Monday morning, when texts went unanswered and their shared GPS link showed no movement since Saturday evening, concern turned into alarm. Evan's sister reported them missing at 10:03 a.m. Rangers launched a Level 1 search by noon, expanding to a full-scale operation by dusk. Helicopters scanned the ridge lines. Drones swept the lower valleys. Rescue dogs were deployed from both the Bear Lake and Glacier Gorge trailheads. By the second day, rescuers found their Jeep, parked neatly off the main lot, keys inside, doors locked. Inside were their wallets, food, and spare clothes. The passenger seat held Cole's camera case, empty. Stranger still, a hiker reported seeing 2 men who matched their description Sunday morning near the Timberline Loop, almost 4 miles east of their planned route. He described one of them walking ahead, the other lagging behind, like they weren't talking. But the timestamp didn't fit. If it was them, they should have been back at camp, not crossing into a different section of the park. Search maps from that week show a troubling pattern. Rescue teams swept the area in expanding grids, dozens of volunteers combing through canyons and creeks, yet not one physical clue surfaced. No tent, no clothing, no food wrappers. It was as if they'd packed up and walked straight out of existence. The only tangible discovery came from Ridgepoint Hollow, the last known GPS point. Beneath a thin layer of pine needles, rangers found a patch of disturbed soil, like something heavy had been dragged across it, and, nearby, a half-burned stick coated in ash. Forensics couldn't determine if it had been part of a campfire or something else entirely. The following week, temperatures dropped sharply. Early snow sealed off the upper trailheads, forcing search operations to suspend until spring. By then, media coverage had already spread beyond Colorado. 2 missing hikers, no trace, no witnesses, only one faint rumor whispered among locals, that the mountain keeps what it wants. But when spring thawed the snow months later, the forest returned every clue it had hidden, except for them. By the end of the first week, the disappearance of Evan Myers and Cole Turner had become one of the most exhaustive search efforts ever conducted in Rocky Mountain National Park. Over 100 volunteers joined professional rescuers, fanning out across 16 square miles of dense terrain. Helicopters traced the ridge lines while drones scanned riverbeds. The weather remained clear, unusually so for late October, granting searchers precious extra days before snow could close the area again. At first, investigators followed logic. Both men were experienced hikers. Maybe they'd misread the map, taken a wrong turn toward the Timberline Loop, and gotten trapped by nightfall. But the coordinates from their last GPS ping contradicted that theory. It placed them exactly where they should have been. On the third day, a canine unit alerted near a section of brush 2 miles from Ridgepoint Hollow. Teams swarmed the area, expecting a breakthrough. What they found instead was unsettling. 3 sets of footprints in the mud, not 2. 2 matched the friends' boot sizes. The third was smaller, barefoot, and ended abruptly near a creek bed. Rangers assumed it belonged to another hiker, but no third person was ever reported missing that week. Media coverage intensified. News vans lined the park entrance, and locals began trading stories. Lights seen on the ridge, strange noises echoing after dark. Investigators dismissed them as rumor until a pair of night hikers produced something concrete. A video clip, 32 seconds long, showing distant flickers of light on the horizon around 2 a.m. The pattern looked deliberate, like someone signaling with a flashlight. When authorities triangulated the location, it matched the area where the GPS tracker would later be found years later. By day 6, search morale was faltering. One ranger described the forest as wrongly silent, as if sound itself refused to travel. They'd covered every mapped trail, every drainage path, every ridge where wind might scatter evidence. Yet there was nothing, no scraps of gear, no prints, no sign of wildlife interference. Then came the call from a neighboring ranger station. A volunteer scanning the Southern Trail entrance had located a trail register with an odd entry dated October 16th, 2 days after the men's last known communication. The handwriting, shaky but legible, read, "Cold. Lost. Following the lights." Below it, a faint smear, maybe from rain, maybe from a finger, distorted the signature. Forensic comparison was inconclusive, but Evan's sister swore it looked like his. Searchers returned to that zone, convinced they'd find a clue. They found only more confusion. The terrain there was steep and unforgiving, full of blind corners and drop-offs that ended in sheer stone. Yet GPS mapping later confirmed no one could have physically walked from Ridgepoint Hollow to that southern station in the time frame the note suggested. It was too far. By the 10th day, resources thinned. Officials downgraded the mission from search and rescue to recovery. Families refused to accept it. Cole's father camped near the base trailhead for weeks, leaving food and firewood in case his son was wandering nearby. Evan's sister organized online efforts that drew thousands of followers dissecting maps and timestamps, convinced the truth lay in the digital trail. Winter came early. Snow swallowed the ridges, forcing rangers to suspend the search on November 2nd. The mountain went quiet again, until a storm 2 nights later revealed something new. A park worker clearing debris from the lower gorge found 2 sets of footprints pressed into melting snow. They ran parallel for 50 feet, then split apart, one veering sharply uphill, the other descending toward the ravine. At the bottom, the tracks simply stopped. No drag marks, no blood, no bodies. Search teams resumed briefly, but within days, the snow erased everything. By spring, what little evidence remained had vanished. The case was officially labeled Unsolved Wilderness Disappearance. But buried somewhere beneath that same snow, their GPS tracker was still recording, still moving. And 5 years later, it would finally be found. 5 years passed. Seasons came and went. Tourists returned to the trails, and the case of Evan Myers and Cole Turner became another wilderness mystery folded into Colorado folklore. But to their families, it was anything but over. In early October 2027, a solo hiker named Liam Porter, 29, was descending from an unmarked ridge about 6 miles south of Glacier Gorge when he spotted something glinting between roots. He almost ignored it, thinking it was litter, until he noticed the faint flash of metal buried under the soil. It was a small, cracked device, black, rectangular, with faded orange edges. The screen was shattered, but the back bore a faintly legible engraving, Garmin eTrex 32X. Liam reported it to park authorities. 2 days later, investigators confirmed it was the same model of GPS tracker registered to Evan Myers. Somehow, after 5 years of exposure, the microSD card inside was still intact. When data analysts at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation extracted its contents, they expected standard navigation logs, coordinates, timestamps, elevation charts. What they found instead forced them to reopen the entire case. The last publicly known coordinates had shown the device going dark around 8:14 p.m. on October 14, 2022. But the raw internal data told a different story. The tracker hadn't stopped recording that night. It had continued logging movement, sporadic, uneven, for another 4 days. Between October 15th and 18th, the GPS showed the same 2-point pattern repeating again and again, 40.3119 degrees north, minus 105.6834 degrees west. Then, a return to 40.3120 degrees north, minus 105.6830 degrees west. A distance of roughly 130 feet, back and forth, dozens of times, as if someone or something was pacing in circles in a confined area. Even more bizarre, the timestamps showed bursts of movement around midnight, then hours of complete stillness. Analysts compared the topography. That section of the map was a narrow ravine with steep walls, inaccessible by any known trail. Search maps from 2022 hadn't even included it. The pacing pattern ended abruptly at 3:46 a.m. on October 18th. The final coordinate was logged halfway up the ravine slope, at an altitude too steep for camping. After that, the device stopped transmitting entirely. Investigators were baffled. If the tracker had been buried, how did it keep recording movement? And if the men were still alive during those days, why hadn't they used their emergency beacon? The discovery reignited national attention. Experts debated theories: glacial movement, data corruption, wildlife interference. But none explained why the movements were so deliberate, or why they occurred at consistent intervals during the night. Then a forensic analyst uncovered a small, easily overlooked anomaly. In between GPS entries, the device had stored short bursts of sensor data, pressure readings, temperature logs, and timestamps from its internal accelerometer. One spike stood out. On October 17th at 11:23 p.m., the barometric sensor recorded a sudden increase in pressure followed by a sharp drop, as if the device had been quickly lifted, then covered. Whatever happened that night, something, or someone, had touched the tracker. 2 months later, a ranger team returned to the ravine using the coordinates from the final entry. They expected erosion, maybe remnants of a rock slide. Instead, they found what looked like a partial collapse: broken branches, dislodged stones, and something buried under a thin crust of soil, a torn piece of nylon, identified later as matching the lining of Cole Turner's hiking pack. It was the first physical trace of either man ever found. But when forensic analysts matched soil composition from the nylon to the ravine floor, the results didn't align. The dirt embedded in the fabric came from nearly a mile away. Somehow, whatever had happened in those last hours involved movement the GPS couldn't account for. The pacing, the pressure spikes, the displaced soil, none of it fit. And yet, the GPS data wasn't the most disturbing part. Because hidden deep in the device's metadata, investigators found a file that shouldn't have existed, one they never remembered the model being able to store at all. A small, encrypted audio clip. The file shouldn't have existed. The Garmin eTrex 32X wasn't designed to record audio. It didn't even have a microphone. Yet when analysts at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation opened the device's root directory, they found a single encrypted file labeled A17_1023 LGF, timestamped October 17, 2022, 11:24 p.m. The same moment the GPS's barometric sensor had spiked. At first, they assumed corruption, random data the system mislabeled as an audio log. But when a forensics tech converted the raw bytes into a waveform, sound emerged, faint, crackling, and fragmented, like wind rushing through metal. Beneath the distortion, two voices surfaced. The first was unmistakably Evan. "Cole, stop. Just stop. We're walking in circles." Then static. The second voice, deeper, breathless, cut in. "It's not the same place. Look, rocks are different." A scraping noise followed, the crunch of gravel underfoot, and then a distant echo that resembled a shout. Analysts enhanced the file, filtering frequencies until they could isolate fragments. The shout repeated, once, twice, 3 times, each fainter than the last, as if bouncing off canyon walls. Then the audio cut out mid-breath. The clip lasted 39 seconds. It ended with a metallic click. Experts couldn't explain how a non-recording GPS had captured it. One theory suggested electromagnetic interference might have caused a partial radio imprint from another nearby device. Another proposed the data came from an external attachment, though none had been registered. But when engineers examined the circuit board, they noticed something odd. The device's casing had a fine, hand-scratched mark on its underside, 3 short lines etched in a rough triangle. Under magnification, the scratches appeared deliberate, like someone had pressed a metal tool into it while holding the unit still. Forensic metallurgists later determined the grooves matched the serrated edge of a multi-tool knife, a model identical to the one Evan was known to carry. Had he tried to mark his location or leave a signal? Investigators replayed the recording dozens of times. At one point, a senior audio specialist from Quantico noticed something chilling buried beneath the voices, a faint rhythmic pulse between 7 and 9 hertz, consistent with motion sensors detecting vibration. In other words, the GPS wasn't stationary when it recorded. It was moving. Cross-referencing timestamps revealed that during those exact 39 seconds, the device had climbed 28 feet in elevation, veering slightly east before stopping again. If Evan and Cole were still together, one had likely been climbing while the other recorded, though unknowingly, every sound of their final moments. The revelation sparked chaos online once the detail leaked. Armchair investigators plotted the audio coordinates on Google Earth, identifying a narrow chute of rock that ended in a vertical wall. Some claimed to spot a figure in one of Cole's last recovered photos, blurred between trees at nearly the same position. Authorities urged the public to ignore speculation, but internally, they couldn't shake the question. If the GPS had been moving while recording, who, or what, was carrying it? Then came the most jarring find. A data forensics intern examining the memory sectors noticed an unexplained repetition in the binary sequence following the audio header, tiny intervals repeating every 12 seconds, like a heartbeat encoded in digital form. When translated into time markers, those intervals aligned with the pacing pattern logged across the 4 days after the men disappeared. In other words, the circles the GPS tracked weren't random. They were measured, deliberate, perfectly timed. Each loop lasting exactly 12 seconds. Whatever was moving through that ravine wasn't wandering. It was following a pattern. And that pattern didn't match any known natural or mechanical phenomenon in the area. Investigators were left staring at a new possibility, one that chilled them more than any physical discovery could. Because the data implied one terrifying conclusion. 4 nights after their disappearance, something, or someone, had been walking with intent. When the GPS data was released, heavily redacted but enough to ignite speculation, the internet fractured into camps overnight. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had evidence. And every version of the truth only made the story darker. Theory 1, the survival loop. Some believed Evan and Cole were alive longer than anyone realized. The 12-second pattern, they argued, wasn't supernatural, it was human rhythm. Maybe one of them was injured, forcing the other to pace in circles for hours, trying to stay awake, trying to stay sane. When exhaustion blurred into delirium, the survivor might have dragged the other in short intervals, leaving the strange elevation data and recorded breathing. But experts countered with the impossible. The pattern persisted for 4 nights. Unwavering, identical, no deviation, no fatigue signal. No human could sustain that. Theory 2, the magnetic distortion hypothesis. A group of engineers proposed something scientific yet unsettling. The Rockies were rich in magnetite, and certain anomalies could trigger GPS interference, feedback loops that recorded phantom movement. The rhythmic pulse might have been the device reacting to shifting magnetic fields, creating the illusion of deliberate motion. But then came the audio. Magnetic interference couldn't explain human voices, nor the metallic click at the end. If it wasn't mechanical, it had to be conscious. Theory 3, the third presence. The most chilling theory came from law enforcement insiders. During reanalysis, a low-frequency whisper was detected beneath the final segment of the recording, a third voice, faint, almost indistinguishable, uttering a single word. When enhanced, the word sounded like back. The problem? Neither Evan nor Cole had spoken it. The cadence didn't match their speech patterns. Whoever said it did so close to the mic, as if standing right beside the device. Investigators quietly requested additional forensic modeling, but nothing more was released publicly. Theory 4. The trail camera connection. Months later, an amateur sleuth uncovered something staggering. A wildlife trail cam, located 2 miles from the last GPS ping, had been logged by park rangers 5 years earlier but never cross-checked. When the images were reopened, one frame stood out. Taken at 2:47 a.m., it showed a figure half illuminated by the camera's infrared flash, standing among the trees. It wasn't clear if the person was male, but the outline carried a backpack, tilted oddly to one side. The photo timestamp matched the exact minute the Garmin's final loop ended. Officials dismissed it as coincidence, a random hiker caught at night. But to the families, it felt like proof that someone else had been there. Evan's father began pushing for reinvestigation. If there was a third person, he told the Denver Post, then it means one of them might have survived longer than we think. His words reignited public obsession. Forums flooded with diagrams, voice analyses, even geospatial overlays comparing the loop path to known search grid routes. And then, one user uploaded something that froze everyone. A composite of the GPS path overlaid with satellite imagery revealed that the loops weren't circles at all. They formed an irregular, angular pattern, 6 points connecting in a near-perfect shape. A hexagon, each vertex aligned with a local topographic marker, ridge peaks, rock spires, and an old survey cairn. No one could explain why. The data suggested intentional mapping, as if the movements were marking something specific. Searchers returned to the ridge for the first time in years, using the same coordinates. At each point, they found nothing until the final vertex. Buried under 6 inches of stone lay a rusted fragment of metal, scorched black. Tests revealed it wasn't from any known hiking gear. It was a piece of aircraft-grade aluminum, melted at over 1,200 degrees Celsius. The last recorded crash in that region had been over 40 years ago, and it happened 12 miles away. So why was a fragment from it found exactly where Evan and Cole's last GPS signal stopped? And why did the scorch marks form the same triangular pattern scratched into the underside of Evan's device? Because that meant something no one wanted to say out loud. Maybe Evan had seen it before. The mountain had held its silence for 5 long years. But the fragment changed everything. Forensic analysts confirmed it. The metal's origin traced back to Flight 206, a small private Cessna that disappeared in 1978. The wreck was recovered miles away, but the official report had noted a missing wing panel, never found. Now, decades later, a portion of that same panel had resurfaced exactly where Evan and Cole vanished. The discovery reignited national interest. Reporters flooded Estes Park. The case file, once sealed, reopened under federal review. Investigators retraced the GPS pattern, trying to decipher why 2 experienced hikers would fixate on those 6 points. One analyst proposed a disturbing theory. It's as if they were following something invisible, something embedded in the terrain. To verify, a joint search team was deployed to each coordinate again, equipped with ground-penetrating radar. At point 5, near a steep drop called Raven's Hollow, they detected a void beneath the earth, roughly the size of a small room. Excavation began. What they found wasn't a room. It was a cavity lined with scorched soil and fragments of composite metal, melted and fused to rock. Embedded within the layer was a camera lens, cracked but intact, dated to a model discontinued in 2015. The serial number matched Cole's Nikon. It was a breakthrough. The SD card survived. When technicians loaded the data, only one file remained, A corrupted video, 3 minutes and 42 seconds long. The first 30 seconds were darkness, punctuated by heavy breathing and wind. Then, faintly, a voice whispered, "We shouldn't have touched it." It was Evan's voice. The footage jolted violently, the sound of metal scraping stone. A flicker of light, headlamp reflection off a metallic surface half buried in dirt. The object appeared to be a panel, triangular, humming faintly even as the camera shook. Cole muttered something about radiation, his tone strained, terrified. Then came the last frame. The light flared white, and a sudden mechanical pulse cut through the audio. The camera fell sideways, capturing a blurred outline, something humanoid, but wrong in proportion, before static consumed the file. The final timestamp matched the moment their GPS tracker stopped moving. Officials called it inconclusive. The public called it proof. Theories exploded again. Some argued the wreckage had hidden classified military tech, some long-forgotten experiment. Others claimed the radiation reading, spiking on the camera's metadata, wasn't from the wreck, but from something still active underground. A week after the footage leaked, a federal containment notice sealed Ravens Hollow. The site was officially labeled unstable terrain. Unofficially, locals said men in unmarked trucks arrived at midnight and removed something large wrapped in black tarp. But the strangest revelation came later. A data engineer re-examined the corrupted GPS file, focusing on the rhythmic pattern from the night Evan and Cole disappeared. When converted to spectrogram form, the signal translated into visual code, a wave pattern with evenly spaced peaks. When superimposed over the satellite map of the ridge, the peaks aligned perfectly with the coordinates of the hexagon. It wasn't random. It was intentional transmission, a looped broadcast recorded through the tracker itself. Which begged the question, from where? The last loop originated beneath the mountain, 40 feet below the final point, where no excavation had ever been done. The mountain wasn't just echoing data, it was sending it. That was the last entry before the investigation shut down entirely. The official report ended with a single redacted paragraph. But one leaked note from an analyst contained a handwritten line, found in Evan's recovered field notebook. "If we stop moving, it starts again." The line was underlined twice, written on October 17, 2020, 3 days after their supposed disappearance. And below it, in smaller letters, were 2 words no one could explain. It listened. 5 years after the case reopened, the files were sealed again. What began as a missing persons search had turned into something else entirely, something the public was never meant to see. The official conclusion read, "Exposure, terrain fatigue, environmental disorientation." No mention of the melted metal. No mention of the recorded signal. No mention of the note that said it listened. Evan's parents refused to accept it. They hired private search teams, former military trackers, data specialists, even a linguist who studied the rhythmic GPS pulse. He found something new. The pattern wasn't random static. When slowed down, it produced 6 repeating tones, each separated by exactly 4.2 seconds. 42. The same digits from the flight number, 206. Cole's younger brother, Luke, returned to the ridge last October with one of the analysts. Using a handheld receiver, he picked up a faint transmission from the same coordinates. The signal repeated every 12 seconds, identical to the original Garmin pattern. But there was one difference. This time, the signal ended with 3 short beeps, followed by a single word, distorted but unmistakable. Return. The analyst documented everything. 2 days later, his report vanished from the public record. Locals say the ridge feels wrong now. Birds avoid it, compasses spin. On clear nights, hikers swear they hear faint metallic clicking echoing from the valley, repeating like a heartbeat under stone. Evan's father keeps the recovered GPS device in a glass case. Every October, the LED flickers on by itself for exactly 12 seconds, then goes dark again. The light pattern never changes. 12 flashes, 6 peaks. Always the same. No one knows what it means or what it's waiting for. But if you map those flashes on a time grid, they still form that same impossible shape, the hexagon. And right in the center of it sits Raven's Hollow, where the signal still pulses. And sometimes, if you listen long enough, it sounds less like static and more like breathing.